Good evening and welcome to my Week 7 multimedia presentation. This week's presentation will focus on major non-tax revenue sources. As a quick overview for today's presentation, we'll go over the following. We'll go over some major categories of non-tax revenue sources. We will specifically talk about the City of Burbank's most prominent non-tax revenue sources, why that might be the case for the City of Burbank, some recommendations. Of course, I'll list the references for the information that I used in today's presentation and a closing. So we have quite a bit of major non-tax revenue sources categories. Last week we talked about sales tax and property taxes, which are prevalent revenue streams for a lot of local cities. But listed on this slide are some major non-tax revenue sources. We have user fees. User fee is a payment made by an individual in order to gain access. Think kind of like a permission to do something. So an example might be a plumbing permit or a garage sale permit. So there's a fee to have access to doing those things, and that's what user fees are. We also have user charges. User charges, on the other hand, are payments made in exchange for a service or a utility. For example, a city might provide water or sewer services, and they can charge a user charge for the water that goes through the pipes, for example. In either case, user fees and user charges are supposed to cover the cost of providing that service or providing that permission. We also have categorical grants, and categorical grants could be formula grants or project grants. As an example, one that we're currently working with in the City of Monrovia for a formula grant is the Section 5310 grant, which is the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program. This is a formula grant based on the number of community members that might need the program, in this case, the number of seniors and individuals with disabilities for the City of Monrovia. So it's based on a formula, and that's how your grants are calculated. You also have project grants, and these are usually based on a competitive application. So say a local city might want to work on enhancing a park. They provide a proposal to, say, regional parks and open space, and hopefully win a project grant. Block grants are also another kind of grants. One that maybe a lot of us have seen are the community development block grants, which are funding resources that can be used for housing rehabs, facility improvements, and essentially kind of initiatives that promote neighborhood revitalization. So there's a lot of different types of non-tax revenue sources that local cities usually get funding for or utilize. Now, what about specifically for the City of Burbank? The City of Burbank's most prominent non-tax revenue source can be seen on this pie chart. So the largest components of the governmental activities revenue sources for the City of Burbank are, of course, their sales taxes and property taxes, but really close to that are their charges for services at 22%, their operating grants and contributions, and this sliver of pie for other revenues. For today's presentation, I'll focus on their charges for services. A large part of Burbank's charges for services is actually comprised of the revenues that they receive under the Burbank Water and Power Enterprise Fund. As you can see, the electricity revenue budget for the City of Burbank is $279 million, and their water revenue budget for fiscal year 24-25 is $46.18 million. So their overall revenue budget of over almost $780 million, a large part of it is comprised of their BWP revenues. And why is that? Well, Burbank owns and operates their own water and power utility system. They service over 50,000 residents, and they've had this system in place for over 100 years. So it's quite an old system, well established and trusted by the community. And it is community owned because it's not privatized, it's not owned by a private company. And of course, my recommendations would be that Burbank Water and Power continue to operate its own electricity and water utility services because it is city owned. The local jurisdiction and the community has more control about their user rates. Any rates will have to go most likely out to vote to its community members. So it creates this sense of accountability. In addition, because it is owned by the government, by a local city, any profits essentially go back into improving its own infrastructure. So, Burbank Water and Power, the recommendation would be to continue operating and to continue utilizing its non-tax revenue source, which is its user charges and user rates, into feeding back into its own system. Listed here are the references for the information that I used for today's presentation. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate your feedback. Looking forward to everybody's presentation this week.